You ever notice how the quiet ones are usually the most dangerous? The biker laughed as the sound of a revving engine rolled across the empty Texas highway, loud enough to rattle the gas station windows. A dusty gray pickup sat alone beside pump number 3, its tires coated in dried ranch mud, a horse trailer hitched behind it, with one flickering brake light glowing red in the dark. The woman standing beside the truck didn't react to the laughter. She just tightened the fuel cap slowly and rested one weathered hand against the side of the trailer while warm desert wind carried the smell of gasoline, leather, and distant rain across the lot. Amara Hayes wore an old denim jacket faded white at the seams, dark work jeans, and a pair of worn brown boots stained with red clay. Nothing about her looked threatening. To most people driving through Black Creek County, she was just the quiet black rancher who kept to herself outside town limits. The woman with too many fences, too many horses, and not enough conversation. But the men climbing off the motorcycles didn't know that. Wade Grayson killed his engine first. The silence that followed felt heavy. 5 bikes lined the pumps now, chrome glinting beneath the station lights like rows of sharpened teeth. Wade stepped forward slowly, rolling his shoulders beneath a leather vest patched with the mark of the iron vultures. Mid-40s, broad chest, gray eyes cold enough to make decent people look away. He stared at Amara for several long seconds before smirking. "That your horse trailer?" he asked. Amara nodded once. "Yep." Her voice stayed calm, low, almost tired. Wade glanced at the rusted fencing supplies in the truck bed. Coiled wire, feed sacks, a shovel, ranch tools. "Didn't think women like you lasted long out here," one biker muttered behind him. A few chuckled under their breath. Amara ignored them and reached for the receipt printer beside the pump. The paper trembled lightly in the hot wind. Somewhere down the highway, thunder rolled low across the plains. Wade stepped closer. Too close. "You deaf or just rude?" he asked. The fluorescent light above them buzzed softly. Amara folded the receipt once and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Her eyes lifted toward Wade for the first time. Calm eyes. Steady. The kind that didn't dart around looking for exits. "Just trying to get home before the storm," she said. Wade smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Storm's already here." One of the younger bikers circled around the truck and tapped the horse trailer with his boot. The horse inside shifted nervously. Metal clanged softly. Amara's expression changed almost invisibly. Not fear. Awareness. "Easy now." The biker mocked toward the trailer. "Probably worth more than the truck." Another laugh. Another step closer. The cashier inside the station pretended not to notice. An older white man stocking cigarettes behind the counter kept his eyes lowered like this wasn't his business. Around here, nobody stepped between Wade Grayson and trouble. Amara noticed all of it. The exits. The reflections in the glass. The distance between each man. The slight limp in the tall biker near the diesel pump. Her breathing never changed. Wade reached toward the brim of her ranch cap and tilted it upward slightly with 2 fingers. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he said quietly. For 1 second, the wind died completely. Amara looked him directly in the eyes. No shaking, no panic, just silence. Something about that unsettled him. Most people either argued or backed down. She did neither. Wade's smirk faded a little. "You got attitude," he muttered. "No," Amara replied softly. "Just patience." The younger bikers exchanged looks. One snorted a laugh. Another spat onto the pavement beside her boots. Then suddenly a sharp cracking sound exploded across the station lot. Metal sparked beside pump 4. One biker stumbled backward, cursing as his pistol spun across the concrete after being struck clean out of his hand by something nobody saw coming. Silence swallowed the gas station whole. Every head snapped toward the dark hills beyond the highway. Wade froze. The biker stared at his trembling hand, shocked more than hurt. Smoke curled faintly from the shattered metal near the ground. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Wade slowly turned back toward Amara Hayes. But she was already opening the driver's side door of her truck like none of it had surprised her at all. The sound of rain followed Amara Hayes all the way down Route 16 as her pickup rolled through the empty backroads outside Black Creek County. The windshield wipers dragged slowly across the glass, pushing away streaks of muddy water, while distant lightning flashed beyond the hills like silent artillery buried somewhere deep in the clouds. Inside the truck, the only sound was the soft rattle of feed chains hanging behind the seats, and the steady breathing of the horse in the trailer. Amara drove with one hand resting lightly on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead, calm as stone. Most people would have gone straight to the sheriff after what happened at the gas station. Most people would have panicked after hearing a gunshot crack through the dark without warning. But Amara did not look surprised. She looked tired. The ranch appeared 20 miles outside town beyond a cattle gate, half covered in wild grass. A faded wooden sign swung gently beside the dirt road. Hayes Ranch. The white paint had almost disappeared beneath years of dust and sun. The property stretched across nearly 40 acres of dry Texas land surrounded by crooked fencing, grazing horses, and weather-beaten barns that leaned slightly under the weight of time. No luxury, no fancy trucks, no hired ranch hands. Just silence, wind, and work. Amara parked beside the stable and stepped out into cold rain. Her boots landed softly in the mud as she unlatched the horse trailer and guided the black mare inside the barn. The animal nudged gently against her shoulder once the saddle came off. "Easy, girl," Amara whispered. Her voice softened around animals in a way it never did around people. Warm yellow light spilled from a single bulb hanging over the stable aisle while rain hammered the tin roof overhead. Amara checked the water trough, spread fresh hay, and locked the stall gate before finally walking toward the ranch house carrying a rusted toolbox beneath one arm. The house itself was small and plain. One story, wooden porch, 2 rocking chairs nobody ever used. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee, cedarwood, and old books. A police scanner sat on the kitchen counter beside neatly stacked receipts and handwritten feed invoices. Every object in the house had a purpose. Nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary. Amara removed her jacket slowly and hung it beside the door. A faded scar crossed one shoulder beneath her thermal shirt, disappearing beneath the fabric before the light could fully catch it. She moved through the kitchen quietly, almost mechanically, pouring black coffee into a chipped mug while thunder rolled outside the windows. Then the police scanner crackled alive. Possible firearm discharge reported near Miller's Gas and Feed off Route 16. No injuries confirmed. A second voice followed. Witnesses say the shooter was nowhere in sight. Amara took one sip of coffee without reacting. The scanner continued. Involved parties believed connected to Iron Vulture's motorcycle club. Silence returned. She reached over calmly and turned the volume lower. A few minutes later, headlights appeared through the rain outside her front gate. Amara glanced through the kitchen window. An old sheriff department SUV rolled slowly onto the property before stopping near the porch. Sheriff Nolan Price stepped out, adjusting the collar of his brown jacket against the storm. Mid-50s. Tired eyes. Honest posture. The kind of lawman who looked like he had spent too many years trying to keep peace between bad men and scared people. He removed his hat before knocking twice against the screen door. Amara opened it halfway. "Evening, Sheriff." Nolan studied her face carefully. "Heard you had some trouble in town." "Nothing I could not handle." Rainwater dripped from the brim of his hat as he looked past her toward the quiet house behind her. "Wade Grayson does not usually let things go." Amara rested one hand against the doorframe. "Neither does the weather around here." Nolan exhaled softly. "You know what concerns me?" She waited. "You did not look scared at that gas station." Lightning flashed outside again, briefly illuminating the ranch yard behind them in pale white light. For one long second, neither spoke. Then Amara lowered her eyes toward the muddy porch boards and answered quietly. "Fear keeps people alive, Sheriff. Panic gets them buried." Something in the way she said it made Nolan still completely. Not dramatic, not threatening, certain, like experience talking through exhaustion. The sheriff nodded once slowly before stepping back toward his vehicle. "Lock your doors tonight," he said. Amara glanced toward the dark hills beyond the ranch fence where thunder rolled low across the county again. "I always do." Morning arrived gray and heavy over Black Creek County. Low clouds drifted across the Texas sky while cold wind rolled through the open pasturelands, bending tall grass in slow waves beneath the rising sun. Amara Hayes stood near the north fence line with a pair of work gloves tucked into her back pocket and a hammer hanging loosely from one hand. The broken section of fencing beside her leaned inward where last month's storm had snapped 2 wooden posts clean through. She worked quietly, driving fresh nails into cedar boards while her horse grazed nearby in silence. From the hill above the ranch, the entire valley stretched for miles. Empty roads. Oil pumps rocking in the distance. Rusted barns scattered across the plains like forgotten memories. Most people thought life out here moved slow. They were wrong. Trouble simply traveled quieter in places where everybody carried secrets. A dusty pickup approached along the dirt road shortly after sunrise. Sheriff Nolan Price stepped out holding 2 paper coffee cups from Martha Reed's diner in town. "Figured you probably forgot breakfast again," he called. Amara wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist before walking toward the gate. "You drove 20 miles for coffee?" Nolan handed her a cup. "I drove 20 miles because Wade Grayson spent half the night looking for whoever fired that shot." Amara took a slow sip. Black coffee. No sugar. Just the way she liked it. "Did he find them?" Nolan watched her carefully. "No. But he is angry. And angry men like Wade usually need somebody to blame." Amara glanced toward the open fields beyond the ranch. "Then he should blame the man carrying the gun." Nolan almost smiled at that, but the expression faded quickly. "You know what his people are saying around town?" She remained silent. "They think somebody was protecting you." Wind pushed across the fence line again, carrying the smell of rain-soaked dirt and diesel fuel from the highway. Amara set the coffee cup on the fence post beside her. "People in town always think something." Nolan studied her weathered hands for a moment. No shaking. No nervous movement. Just old scars and calm control. "You ever shoot rifles, Amara?" he asked casually. Her eyes lifted toward him slowly. "Out here," she replied. "Everybody shoots rifles." The sheriff leaned against the truck door, unconvinced. "You know what bothered me most last night?" "What is that?" "Whoever took that shot did not miss by accident." Silence settled between them. Somewhere behind the barn, a horse snorted softly. Nolan looked out across the property. "You have lived out here almost 3 years now. Paid cash for the ranch. No family visits. No real friends in town. Yet somehow every drifter, thief, and drunk who crosses your fence line suddenly decides not to come back." Amara crouched near the broken fence post and tightened a bolt with slow, steady movements. "Maybe word gets around." Nolan exhaled through his nose. "Maybe." Before either could say more, the sound of motorcycles echoed faintly across the valley. Deep engines. Multiple riders. Amara did not turn immediately. Nolan did. 4 bikes appeared along the distant ridge road, kicking dust high into the morning air. The Iron Vultures. Wade rode at the front. Even from nearly half a mile away, the sheriff recognized the shape of his silver handlebars. Nolan muttered under his breath. "That man wakes up angry." Amara stood slowly, resting both hands against the wooden fence rail. The wind tugged lightly at loose strands of hair near her face. "No," she said quietly. "Men like Wade wake up afraid." Nolan looked at her sharply after that, not because of the words themselves, but because of how certain she sounded saying them. The motorcycles never stopped at the ranch. They slowed just enough for Wade to stare down from the ridge above the property before continuing toward town. A silent message. A warning. Dust drifted behind the bikes long after they disappeared. Nolan adjusted his sheriff hat uneasily. "You should stay in today." Amara picked up the hammer again and drove another nail clean into the fence post with one solid strike. "I have horses to feed." "Amara." She paused but did not look at him. "If Wade pushes this too far, I cannot guarantee things stay peaceful." For the first time that morning, something flickered faintly across her face. Not fear. Not anger. Memory. It vanished almost instantly. "Peace is not something men like him understand," she said softly. Then she returned to fixing the fence while thunder rolled once more somewhere beyond the far western hills. By late afternoon, the storm clouds had drifted east, leaving Black Creek wrapped beneath a pale orange sky that made the old buildings downtown glow like fading embers. Martha Reed's diner sat near the edge of Main Street beside a hardware store and a cracked movie theater that had not shown a film in almost 10 years. Inside the diner, the smell of fried onions, black coffee, and warm biscuits floated through the air while country music hummed softly from an old radio behind the counter. Amara Hayes sat alone near the back window wearing the same faded denim jacket from the night before, a folded ranch supply receipt tucked beside her coffee mug. She rarely stayed long in town. Buy feed. Grab supplies. Leave before dark. That was her pattern. Quiet people survived by becoming forgettable. Martha Reed slid a plate of pot roast onto the table with a tired smile. "You look like somebody who forgot lunch again." "Probably did, Amara replied softly. Martha shook her head. You work that ranch like 3 men. The horses do most of the work. That earned the faintest laugh from the older woman. Martha had owned the diner nearly 30 years. She had watched Black Creek change from a hard-working oil town into something colder after the iron vultures arrived. People talked quieter now, smiled less. Even the waitresses flinched whenever motorcycles rolled past the windows. The bell over the diner door suddenly rattled hard. Conversation inside the diner died almost instantly. 3 members of the Iron Vultures stepped inside laughing loudly, leather boots scraping against the old checkered floor. Wade Grayson entered last. Calm, smiling, dangerous in the way thunderstorms looked beautiful right before they destroyed something. Martha's shoulders tightened behind the counter. Evening, Wade. Martha. His eyes moved slowly across the diner until they landed on Amara sitting alone by the window. Well now, he said quietly. There she is. One of the younger bikers noticed a teenage busboy near the kitchen doorway carrying a stack of plates. Thin kid, maybe 16, Hispanic, nervous eyes. The biker stepped into his path deliberately, causing the boy to stumble slightly. A few forks clattered against the floor. Careful there, the biker mocked. Would not want you dropping something important. The kid bent quickly to pick up the silverware without answering. Another biker smirked. Guess manners are hard to learn these days. Nobody in the diner spoke. Nobody moved. Amara watched silently from her booth while sunlight faded across the dusty windows behind her. The younger biker nudged the tray lightly with his boot again, making another plate slide sideways. Hey, he said. Maybe answer when people talk to you. The boy's hands trembled. Sorry, sir. Wade leaned casually against the counter watching the scene unfold with amusement cold enough to freeze the room. Martha looked ready to intervene, but fear held her still. Everybody in Black Creek knew how quickly small moments turned ugly around the Iron Vultures. Then Amara stood up. The sound of the booth sliding backward seemed louder than it should have. Every eye in the diner shifted toward her immediately. She walked across the floor slowly, boots steady against the cracked tiles, until she stopped between the teenage busboy and the bikers. Not aggressive, not loud, calm. That is enough, she said. One biker blinked in disbelief before laughing. You serious? Amara looked toward the frightened kid beside her. Take the plates to the kitchen. The boy hesitated only a second before hurrying away. Wade straightened from the counter, studying Amara carefully. You really like getting involved in things that do not concern you. A frightened kid concerns me. Wade smiled faintly. You know what I think? He stepped closer while the diner held its breath around them. I think you are trying real hard to prove something. Amara met his eyes without flinching. No, she replied quietly. I just do not enjoy watching cowards mistake fear for power. The silence afterward felt enormous. One waitress near the register stopped breathing long enough to fog the glass coffee pot in her hands. Wade's smile faded inch by inch. Not because she insulted him, because she did it without anger, without panic, like she had already measured him and found him small. The biker beside him muttered under his breath, You got a death wish, lady. But Amara never looked away from Wade. Outside the diner windows, thunder rolled again far beyond the darkening hills, while the last light of sunset disappeared from Main Street. The diner stayed silent long after Wade Grayson and the Iron Vultures finally walked out into the night. Nobody touched their food. Nobody returned to their conversations. The only sound left inside Martha Reed's diner was the low hiss of bacon grease behind the counter and the faint rattling of thunder outside the windows. Amara Hayes placed a few bills beneath her coffee cup and reached for her jacket calmly. Martha stepped closer immediately. You should not have done that, she whispered. Amara looked toward the frightened teenage busboy still standing near the kitchen doorway, clutching a dish towel with both hands. Somebody should have. Martha lowered her voice further. Wade does not forget embarrassment. Amara slipped her jacket on slowly. Good thing I did not embarrass him. The older woman stared at her in disbelief. Honey, you looked him dead in the eye in front of half the town. Amara gave the faintest shrug. That was his choice, not mine. Outside, cold wind swept through Main Street carrying loose dirt and dry leaves across the pavement. The motorcycles were gone now, but the feeling they left behind still lingered like smoke after a fire. Amara climbed into her pickup and started the engine while rain tapped softly against the windshield again. Across the street, Sheriff Nolan Price stood outside the hardware store watching her through the dark. Their eyes met briefly beneath the glow of the streetlights. Nolan walked over slowly. "You really enjoy making my job harder," he muttered. Amara rested one hand on the steering wheel. "You should arrest men like Wade more often. You think I have not tried?" Nolan glanced down the empty road where the bikers disappeared minutes earlier. Half this town is scared of them. The other half owes them money. Lightning flashed across the clouds overhead. "Fear spreads fast in small towns," Amara said quietly. Nolan studied her face again. Calm. Controlled. No trace of panic after standing toe-to-toe with the most dangerous man in Black Creek. "You headed home?" he asked. "Before the roads flood." He nodded once, but did not move away from the truck. "Just be careful tonight." Amara looked toward the dark horizon beyond town. "I always am." The drive back to the ranch felt different than usual. Too quiet. The highway stretched empty beneath her headlights while rain drifted sideways across the asphalt in silver streaks. Somewhere near mile marker 12, Amara noticed fresh motorcycle tracks cutting through the muddy shoulder beside the road. Multiple bikes. Recent. Her eyes narrowed slightly before returning to the highway ahead. 20 minutes later, the ranch gate came into view through the storm. But something was wrong. The north fence stood open. One of the floodlights near the stable flickered weakly against the rain. Amara slowed the truck immediately. The horse trailer rattled softly behind her as she killed the engine and stepped into the cold night air. Wind whipped across the property, carrying the sharp smell of gasoline and wet cedar wood. Her boots sank lightly into mud as she moved toward the stable without making a sound. Then she saw it. Feed bags ripped open across the ground. One water trough overturned. Fresh tire tracks carved deep through the ranch yard. A horse whinnied nervously from inside the barn. Amara's jaw tightened almost invisibly. She stepped inside slowly. The overhead light near the stable entrance swung back and forth from a broken chain, casting uneven shadows across the wooden stalls. One of the stall doors hung crooked. Another had been forced open completely. The black mare stamped nervously against the floorboards when Amara approached. "Easy," she whispered softly while placing one steady hand against the horse's neck. Her breathing stayed calm even as thunder shook the roof overhead. Then a voice echoed from the darkness near the back of the stable. "Real shame what can happen to a place out here all alone." Amara turned slowly. Wade Grayson stepped forward beneath the dim swinging light with rain dripping from his leather jacket. Two bikers stood behind him near the stable doors. One held a crowbar loosely at his side. Wade smiled faintly while glancing around the damaged barn. "Guess storms hit harder than people expect." Amara remained still beside the horse. "You broke onto my property." Wade shrugged. "Property is a funny thing around Black Creek." Another flash of lightning illuminated the stable for one brief second. In that moment, one of the bikers noticed something beneath the loose collar of Amara's shirt. A faded military tattoo partially hidden near her shoulder. The man frowned slightly before looking closer. But the light disappeared again before he could make it out clearly. Wade stepped nearer. "You should have stayed quiet at the diner." Rain hammered harder against the roof while the horse shifted anxiously behind Amara. But her voice stayed level. "And you should have stayed off my land." For several long seconds, the only sound inside the stable was rain pounding against the tin roof and the restless shifting of horses behind the wooden stall doors. Wade Grayson stood beneath the swinging light with one hand resting casually near his belt while the two bikers behind him watched Amara haze with growing uncertainty. Something about her stillness unsettled them now. Most people got louder when they were afraid. Most people begged, threatened, or panicked once trouble reached their front door. But Amara did none of those things. She simply stood beside the black mare with one calm hand against the horse's neck while cold rainwater dripped slowly from the edge of her jacket sleeve onto the barn floor. Wade glanced around the damaged stable again and smiled faintly. "You know," he said, "people around here say you moved to Black Creek because you wanted peace." Amara looked toward the broken stall gate nearby before answering quietly. "People around here talk too much." One biker laughed under his breath, but the sound faded quickly when Amara's eyes shifted toward him for the briefest moment. Not angry, focused, like she noticed everything. Wade took another slow step forward. "You should have minded your business at the diner. You should leave my horses alone." The calmness in her voice irritated him more than insults would have. "You think you are tougher than everybody else because you got land and a pickup truck?" Wade asked. Amara lowered her hand from the horse carefully. No. Then what exactly are you trying to prove? Lightning flashed outside again, spilling pale white light through the cracks in the stable walls. For half a second, the faded tattoo beneath Amara's collar became visible once more. One biker squinted harder this time. Eagle. Globe. Anchor. His expression shifted slightly. Wade noticed it immediately. What? He asked without taking his eyes off Amara. The biker hesitated. Nothing. But it clearly was not nothing. Amara saw the recognition pass across the younger man's face before he quickly looked away again. Wade exhaled sharply through his nose. This town was easier before you showed up. Then stop coming to my ranch. The answer came so quietly, it almost disappeared beneath the thunder. Wade stared at her for another second before finally stepping backward toward the stable doors. You got spirit, he muttered. Spirit gets people hurt. Amara's expression never changed. So does arrogance. One of the bikers shifted uneasily near the entrance while another glanced again toward the tattoo hidden beneath her shirt collar. The stable suddenly felt colder than before. Wade pointed toward the damaged feed bags scattered across the floor. Next time, he said softly, it will not just be horse feed. Then he turned and walked out into the rain. The motorcycles roared to life moments later before, disappearing down the muddy road beyond the ranch gate. Silence returned slowly after they left. Real silence. Heavy silence. The kind that made old memories louder. Amara remained motionless inside the stable long after the sound of the engines faded away completely. Then finally she reached down and picked up one torn feed sack from the floor. Grain spilled slowly through her fingers like sand through an hourglass. Her jaw tightened once. Barely noticeable. The black mare nudged her shoulder gently. I know, she whispered. Rainwater leaked through a crack in the stable roof nearby, dripping steadily into a rusted metal bucket. Ping, ping, ping. The sound echoed softly through the dark barn while wind rattled the loose wooden walls. Amara walked slowly back toward the ranch house, carrying an old lantern in one hand. The porch creaked beneath her boots as she stepped inside. Everything in the house remained exactly where she left it. Coffee mug near the sink. Police scanner on the counter. Folded ranch invoices beneath a paperweight shaped like a horseshoe. Calm on the surface. But her eyes moved differently now. Sharper. Measuring distances without thinking. Tracking shadows automatically each time lightning flashed beyond the windows. She crossed the living room quietly and stopped near the hallway closet. For several seconds, she simply stood there breathing slowly while rain hammered against the roof overhead. Then she knelt and pulled aside an old woven blanket from the bottom shelf. Beneath it sat a long black metal case covered in dust. Her hand rested on the lid without opening it. The room fell still around her. Even the storm outside seemed farther away suddenly. Amara closed her eyes briefly. Tiredness crossed her face for the first time all night. Not fear. Grief. The kind carried by people who had spent too many years surviving things they never spoke about. Her thumb brushed against a faded military patch tucked beside the case. The letters had nearly worn away with age. She stared at it quietly while rainwater slid down the windows behind her like silver tears in the dark. The storm passed sometime before dawn, leaving Black Creek County wrapped beneath a strange cold stillness that made the entire valley feel suspended between sleep and warning. Thin fog drifted low across the roads while puddles reflected pale morning light like broken pieces of glass scattered through the dirt. Sheriff Nolan Price stood outside the county station holding a styrofoam cup of stale coffee when the first call came through the radio. Vehicle disabled near Highway 9. The dispatcher said. No injuries reported. Nolan frowned slightly. Disabled how? Static crackled briefly. Front tire blown out. Driver says it looked like somebody shot the rim. Nolan lowered the radio slowly. 30 minutes later, a second call came in. Another biker from the Iron Vultures stranded outside town. This time the chrome handlebars had been hit clean through without touching the rider. No witnesses. No sounds except one sharp crack echoing somewhere far off across the hills. By noon, the entire county was buzzing with rumors. Men gathered outside the hardware store whispering in low voices. Waitresses paused beside coffee pots mid-conversation. Even Martha Reed stopped wiping the diner counter long enough to stare through the windows every time a motorcycle passed. Nobody understood what was happening, but everybody understood one thing clearly. Somebody was hunting the iron vultures without ever being seen. Nolan drove out toward Miller Creek around lunchtime after another call reported Wade Grayson screaming at his men beside the highway shoulder. When the sheriff arrived, 3 bikers stood near their disabled motorcycles looking pale beneath the morning sun. One gas tank had been punctured so precisely that fuel leaked out in a thin, steady stream no wider than a pencil line. Another bike sat crooked in the dirt with its rear tire completely flattened. Wade turned sharply as Nolan stepped out of the SUV. "You going to do your job or not?" he barked. Nolan crouched beside the damaged motorcycle silently. The metal around the puncture mark looked almost polished at the edges. Clean. Controlled. Not random. His stomach tightened slightly. "You see who did it?" he asked. "No," Wade snapped. "Whoever it is shoots from too far out." Nolan looked slowly across the distant hills surrounding the highway. Dry grass. Fence posts. Endless open land. Perfect visibility for someone trained to disappear inside distance itself. One younger biker stood nearby, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "I told you I recognized that tattoo," he muttered quietly toward Wade. "Marine Corps." Wade rounded on him immediately. "Lots of people got military tattoos." "Not like that." The biker swallowed hard. "My brother served overseas. He had the same eagle symbol." Nolan's eyes lifted slowly. "What tattoo?" The biker hesitated before answering. "On the ranch woman. Near her shoulder." Wade cursed under his breath and kicked dirt across the roadside. "You think some rancher lady is doing this?" Nolan did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the damaged gas tank again and studied the tiny puncture hole beneath the sunlight. Then he noticed it. A small brass casing resting half-hidden beneath dry weeds near the ditch line. Long-range caliber. Precision grade. Nolan picked it up carefully between 2 fingers. His pulse slowed. Memory hit him instantly. 20 years earlier, during a training seminar at Fort Hood, he had once watched a military sniper demonstrate controlled shooting from nearly a mile away. The instructors said real snipers never wasted motion, never fired emotionally. Every shot carried intention. Nolan looked back toward the distant western hills beyond the highway. Somewhere out there sat Hayes Ranch. Quiet fences, horses, windmills turning slowly above dry grass, and one woman who never seemed surprised by danger. The sheriff slipped the casing into his jacket pocket without another word. Wade stepped closer. "Well," Nolan finally met his eyes. "Whoever is doing this," he said carefully, "is sending warnings." "Warnings?" Wade scoffed. "Feels more like threats." Nolan glanced once more toward the empty hills before replying quietly. "Trust me, if this person wanted you hurt, you would not still be standing here talking to me." For the first time since Nolan arrived, Wade Grayson said nothing at all. Later that afternoon, the sheriff drove out to Hayes Ranch beneath a pale silver sky. He found Amara repairing another section of fence near the horse pasture while warm wind moved slowly through the tall grass around her boots. She looked exactly the same as always. Calm, focused, unbothered. Nolan stepped out of the SUV holding the brass casing loosely in his hand. "You ever heard of Fallujah?" he asked quietly. Amara paused mid-hammer strike. Only for a second, but Nolan saw it. The smallest flicker crossing her face before disappearing completely. Then she drove the nail into the fence post with one clean motion and answered softly. "Some places are better left buried, Sheriff." The sun disappeared early behind thick storm clouds gathering once again over Black Creek County. By evening, the entire town felt tense enough to crack apart beneath the weight of whispers spreading from diner booths, gas pumps, and hardware store aisles. Nobody said Amara Hayes was responsible for what happened to the iron vultures. But nobody said she was innocent either. Fear moved quietly through small towns. It always had. Sheriff Nolan Price sat alone inside his office, turning the brass casing over slowly beneath the yellow desk lamp while rain tapped softly against the station windows. Fallujah. The name stayed lodged in his mind like an old wound. He finally leaned back in his chair and opened the county database on his aging computer. Amara Hayes. The screen showed almost nothing. Ranch deed. Property taxes. Vehicle registration. Clean record. Too clean. Nolan frowned and typed another search using an older federal access portal he had not touched in years. The loading icon spun slowly. Then suddenly several files appeared before immediately locking behind military clearance warnings. But not before Nolan caught one phrase buried in the records. United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper. His pulse slowed. A second line appeared beneath it. Decorated for valor. Nolan stared at the screen in silence while thunder rolled outside the station walls. Back at the ranch, Amara stood beneath the stable overhang, brushing rainwater from the black mare's coat, while wind rattled loose fencing nearby. The horse shifted uneasily. Animals always sense tension before people did. Amara paused suddenly. Headlights approached fast along the dirt road. Too fast. She set the brush down immediately. 3 motorcycles tore through the ranch gate without slowing, mud spraying behind their tires as engines roared across the property. Wade Grayson climbed off first, holding Martha Reed tightly by the arm beside him. The older woman looked frightened but unharmed. Rain soaked her gray hair against her cheeks while another biker kept close beside her. Amara's eyes hardened instantly. "Let her go," she said. Wade smiled thinly. "Now you sound emotional." Martha tried to pull away slightly. "Amara, do not do this," she whispered. Wade glanced toward the stable. "Funny thing about fear," he said. "Eventually, everybody breaks." The ranch lights flickered once overhead as thunder cracked across the valley. Amara stepped forward slowly from beneath the stable roof. Calm. Measured. Every movement controlled. "This has nothing to do with her." "No," Wade agreed. "It has everything to do with you." Rain dripped steadily from the brim of his leather jacket while the bikers spread out across the muddy yard. One carried a shotgun loosely pointed toward the ground. Another scanned the dark hills nervously every few seconds like he expected unseen eyes watching from the storm itself. Wade noticed it and smirked. "Your friends are not coming tonight." Amara's expression never changed. "I never needed friends to protect myself." Wade laughed once sharply. "There it is. I knew something about you was wrong." He stepped closer to Martha and tightened his grip slightly. "You think you are better than everybody in this town." "No," Amara answered quietly. "I think men who scare old women are weak." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Wade's smile disappeared completely. Rain hammered against the stable roof while wind pushed across the ranch hard enough to sway the hanging lanterns. One biker glanced toward the distant ridge again. Nervous. Uncomfortable. "Wade," he muttered quietly, "maybe we should go." "Shut up." Amara kept her eyes locked on Wade. "Calm. Steady." The same calm that frightened people more than anger. "You want me?" she asked softly. "Then let her leave." Wade stared at her for a long moment before shoving Martha lightly forward through the mud. The older woman stumbled toward the stable immediately. Amara caught her gently before she could fall. "Are you hurt?" Martha shook her head quickly. "No." Wade watched the interaction with narrowed eyes. "You know what your problem is?" he said. "You still believe restraint makes you strong." Lightning flashed across the ranch, illuminating Amara's face in cold white light. "No," she replied quietly. "Restraint is what keeps people alive." One biker suddenly froze beside the motorcycles. His eyes locked onto the open ranch house doorway behind Amara where the black metal case sat partially visible beneath the hallway light. Recognition flooded his face instantly. "Wade," he whispered urgently. "That is military equipment." Silence hit the ranch yard like a hammer. Wade slowly turned toward the house, then back toward Amara. For the first time since arriving at Black Creek County, uncertainty finally entered his eyes. Rain continued falling across Hayes Ranch in long silver lines beneath the dark Texas sky, while nobody in the muddy yard moved for several heavy seconds. Wade Grayson stared toward the black metal case visible inside the ranch house doorway, and for the first time since arriving at Black Creek County, the confidence in his face cracked apart just enough to reveal what had always lived beneath it. Fear. Real fear. The biker nearest the motorcycles stepped backward slowly. "Wade," he muttered again, quieter this time. "We need to leave." But Wade kept his eyes locked on Amara Hayes. "You military?" he asked at last. Amara stood beside Martha Reed beneath the stable light, with rain dripping steadily from the brim of her jacket. Calm. Unshaken. "I was," she answered softly. The wind pushed hard across the ranch, rattling the loose fencing beyond the horse pasture, while thunder rolled low over the hills. Wade swallowed once before trying to force a laugh. "So what? You think that scares me?" Amara's expression never changed. "No." She looked toward the frightened bikers standing behind him. "But it scares them." Silence followed. One biker lowered his shotgun toward the mud completely. Another avoided looking at Amara altogether now. The storm no longer felt like the most dangerous thing on the ranch. Sheriff Nolan Price arrived minutes later, headlights sweeping across the property as his SUV rolled through the open gate. The moment he stepped out and saw Wade with his men standing frozen in the rain, Nolan understood immediately that something had shifted. Not through violence, through truth. He approached slowly, one hand resting near his belt. "Evening, gentlemen." Nobody answered. Nolan looked toward Amara. She gave the smallest nod toward Martha Reed, silently confirming the older woman was unharmed. The sheriff exhaled quietly in relief before turning back toward Wade. "I think it is time everybody goes home." Wade glanced once more toward the military case inside the ranch house, then toward Amara herself. "You could have killed us out there on the highway," he muttered. Rainwater dripped from his jaw onto the mud below. "But you did not." Amara's voice stayed low beneath the storm. "Because I came here to stop fighting." The words landed harder than threats ever could. Wade looked at her differently then. Not like a target. Not like an outsider. Like someone carrying scars he could not begin to understand. Nolan stepped beside him. "You are done here, Wade." The biker leader stood motionless for another second before finally nodding once toward his men. No insults. No final threats. Just exhaustion. One by one, the iron vultures climbed back onto their motorcycles and disappeared into the rain-dark highway beyond the ranch gate. The sound of their engines faded slowly into the distance until only thunder remained. Martha Reed released a shaky breath beside the stable. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. Amara looked toward the dark hills silently. Nolan approached her carefully after Martha returned to his SUV for warmth. "You really were a sniper," he said quietly. Amara's eyes lowered toward the mud beneath her boots. "Long time ago." "Fallujah?" A long pause followed. Then finally she nodded once. The sheriff looked at her differently now too. Not with fear. Respect. "Why Black Creek?" he asked. Wind moved softly through the pasture grass around them, while horses shifted quietly inside the stable. "Because nobody out here cared who I used to be," Amara answered. "They only cared what I looked like." Nolan frowned slightly at that. Amara glanced toward the distant town, lights barely visible beyond the valley. "People see a quiet black woman on a ranch and assume she is weak," she continued softly. "Sometimes silence makes people comfortable enough to reveal themselves." The sheriff had no answer for that. Dawn arrived clear and golden the next morning. The storm had passed completely, leaving fresh sunlight spilling across the open plains of Black Creek County. Amara stood near the north fence line, repairing the final broken post, while the black mare grazed nearby beneath the soft morning breeze. In the distance, a pickup slowed briefly along the county road. Then another. People watching. Not out of suspicion anymore. Out of respect. Sheriff Nolan Price leaned against his SUV near the gate, holding a fresh cup of coffee from Martha's diner while quietly observing the ranch. "Town is talking about you," he called out. Amara hammered another nail into place. "That usually happens when people are bored." Nolan smiled faintly. "No, this time they are listening." She looked across the pasture where sunlight moved like liquid gold through the tall grass. Peaceful, quiet, ordinary. Exactly what she came here for. The black mare wandered over and nudged gently against her shoulder once more. Amara rested one weathered hand against the horse's neck while warm wind carried the smell of cedarwood and rain-soaked earth across the ranch. Far beyond the hills, the roads of Black Creek stretched empty beneath the morning light. And for the first time since arriving in town, nobody looked at Amara Hayes and saw a weak woman standing alone. They saw someone who had every reason to become cruel and chose peace anyway. The fence line stood straight again beneath the rising Texas sun, while the sound of distant windmills turned softly across the valley like the quiet breathing of justice finally left undisturbed.